Things aren't always what they seem. We are now past Easter, full steam ahead into spring. Baseball season is here, vacation season is coming soon, and around the corner is final exam season. That last chance to show that you possess a comprehensive understanding of what you have just spent the past years investing your life in. Today's sermon is about a final exam. The setting is much the same as today. It's springtime. But at this point, the crucifixion of Jesus is still a few short weeks away. So rather than April, our story today probably takes place in February or early March. In mere months, in late May or early June, at the day of Pentecost, the disciples will get their first job, to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Their apprenticeship with Jesus is their education and preparation. And today is their final exam. Are they ready and prepared for the job that is a few short months away? That is today's question. Last year, I had a coworker named Sam. Sam was from West Virginia, and his wife Eurus was from El Salvador. One day, Sam told me that Eurus's grandmother was coming to visit, and he thought I'd like to meet her. I said, absolutely. Knowing Eurus's heritage and that she was bilingual, I asked, does Eurus's grandmother go by abuela? Sure does, Sam said. So Sunday comes, and sure enough, in the worship service at church beside Eurus, I see this diminutive, gray-haired woman. So I go up to her after the service and I say, hi, Eurus's abuela. I'm Sam's boss. It's great to meet you. Now remember, Sam is from West Virginia. Eurus is from El Salvador. And I kid you not, this woman hugs me and looks me dead in the eye and goes, hello! So I had a very brief conversation with her and went on my way, frankly, very confused. I saw Sam later and I said, hey man, is Eurus's abuela British? Oh yeah, I didn't tell you that? She is, but they still call her abuela. All of this was information I could have used previously because, like I said earlier, things are not always what they seem.
Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he told her, for such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon gone.
Our scripture today is about Jesus and the disciples' encounter with a woman from another culture, much like my encounter with Eurus's abuela, and the resulting confusion and frankly misrepresentation of all the parties involved. I want to propose to you that this story is a test of the disciples' faith, and it is one where we are going to see how little they understand. And keep in mind that their first job is months away. This is the time to pass your final exams, and they do not pass. Why would I suggest to you an interpretation that you likely have never heard before? Because just as a movie producer doesn't want you to watch just 2 minutes of his movie and walk away with what you think his objective is, Mark doesn't want us to read just one part of the picture he's giving us about Jesus. There are multiple stories happening here in a row that all mention bread and cleanliness, and Mark is intending for us to take them all together. When we do that, we learn things are not always what they seem, but we can get a greater picture and understanding of what is going on if we can zoom out and take stock of the things around what we have our focus on. For instance, I was in my previous home in Chattanooga, Tennessee a few years ago when I noticed this sign. Somebody wanted passerbys to know that Esther Helton voted for Barack Obama not once, but twice. But remember, things aren't always what they seem. Sometimes you can get a greater understanding of what is going on if you can zoom out and take stock of the things around what you have your focus on. What made this sign particularly interesting was the sign that was located next to it. We can't underestimate the importance of zooming out and looking at the story surrounding the story, like we'll do here in Mark chapter 7. Let's look at the story first. Jesus and his disciples are approached by a woman who asks for healing for her daughter. Jesus responds, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs." The woman agrees and responds, "Yes, but even the dogs eat the crumbs." And Jesus commends her for her faith. There's a few things to note. Some people take umbrage at Jesus using an analogy to a dog here, but it is important to note that he is not calling her a dog. He's teaching in a parable form, in a manner that she would understand. Being a parent, she knows that she has to prioritize her children. In fact, she's doing that very thing here with Jesus. And Jesus is acknowledging what she would already intuitively know. Matthew talks about this story as well, and he indicates that the woman comes to Jesus after Jesus says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel," which is where Mark picks up the story and places it in a house. So evidently she's been following them for some time, and Jesus' remark about being sent to the lost sheep was made to the disciples. So there's two things to take away from this: the priority of the children and Jesus' response to the disciples. So to understand that, let's zoom out some more. Immediately before this story, Jesus and the disciples are in Israel and are questioned by the Pharisees, who complain that the disciples are not following the cleanliness rituals. So in front of the disciples, the Pharisees essentially say, "Hey, your disciples are unclean." Jesus responds that it is not what someone does or eats that makes them unclean, but it is what comes out of their mouths or out of their hearts. So how does Jesus follow that up? By immediately taking the disciples into Tyre, which was a region or a city outside of Israel, the land of the Gentiles or the unclean. And who do they encounter? The woman, whom Mark calls a Syrophoenician, a term to clue us in that she is not Jewish nor anything close. Do you see? Jesus has a lesson with the disciples on what makes people clean or unclean, and then immediately he takes them into unclean territory where they have an encounter with an unclean woman. And the writer of Mark wants us to understand this. But let's zoom out a little bit further. Shortly before the encounter with the Pharisees, Jesus is in Israel and he feeds the 5,000. He feeds them what? Bread. And there are 12 basketfuls left over. 12 basketfuls of bread in Israel. The implication that the gospel writers want us to understand is that Jesus is the bread of life who's able to supply the 12 tribes of Israel with all they need and more. That is on the western coast of the Sea of Galilee in the land of Israel. From there, they get into the discussions about cleanliness and uncleanliness with the Pharisees, and then he takes the disciples outside of Israel to encounter this Gentile woman. Do you see where he's going with this? He's testing the disciples' understanding of his role, and his role not just for Israel, but for the world, because in just a few months, it's going to be their role. So Jesus tests their level of understanding in Tyre, and they fail. Jesus says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel," and he's waiting for them to respond with intercession for her. Jesus is waiting for them to respond, "But even the dogs eat the crumbs, Lord." But not only do they fail after following Jesus for 3 years, they're shown up by a woman who has been following him for 3 minutes. So hear me out. She should be commended. Absolutely. She should be celebrated. But she's not the hero of the story. Jesus is. And this is not a lesson for her. It's a lesson for the disciples. And they fail. So where do they go from here? They go south. Actually southeast. And they wind up on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, which is also outside of Israel. Jesus has taken them from the land of the unclean, northwest of Israel, now to the land of the unclean that is southeast of Israel. For further evidence, Mark dictates that this is the region of the Decapolis, which means 10 cities. But note that it's a Greek term. Mark is making sure that we know that Jesus is in the land of the Gentiles, the unclean. And it is here, against the backdrop of the feeding of the 5,000, the debate on cleanliness with the disciples, and the failed test of the disciples with the Syrophoenician woman, and the breadcrumbs. It's now here in Gentile Greek territory that Jesus feeds the 4,000. And what is left over? 7 basketfuls of bread. So there were 12 basketfuls in Israel to represent the tribes of Israel, and 7 basketfuls in Gentile territory to represent what exactly? There's a lot of debate about this, but a lot of scholars think that this is hearkening back to the 7 nations that inhabited the land of Israel before the Israelites arrived. And many scholars believe that Jesus is going there and having 7 basketfuls left over is a way of saying, I'm not just the bread of life for the Israelites. I'm the bread of life for the whole world too. And I don't just have breadcrumbs. I have leftovers. Remember, things are not always what they seem. but we can get a greater picture and understanding of what is going on if we can zoom out and take stock of the things around what we have our focus on.
I stand in awe of the God who paints the skies. I stand in awe of the one who brings new life. And let your name be lifted higher. And let your name be lifted higher. With all of heaven we will sing, holy, holy, all declaring that our Lord, our God is mighty. And here we stand in awe of your majesty. King, forever we'll sing of your glory. I stand in awe of the God who paints the skies. I stand in awe of the one who brings new life. And let your name be lifted higher. Oh Jesus, let your name be lifted higher. With all of heaven we will sing, holy, holy, all declaring that our Lord, our God is mighty. And here we stand in awe of your majesty. King, forever we'll sing of your glory. Oh, we stand in awe of you. We stand in awe of you. Stand in awe of you. We stand. Glory, honor to the one who overcame, everlasting God. You'll forever reign. Glory, honor to the one who overcame, everlasting God. You'll forever reign. Glory, honor to the one who overcame, everlasting God. You'll forever reign. Glory, honor to the one who overcame, everlasting God. You'll forever reign. You'll forever reign. You'll forever reign. You'll forever reign. With all of heaven we will sing, holy, holy, all
Welcome to Canadian Bakin on Church Street in downtown Huntsville. We're joined by the owner, Matt Johnson. Thanks for letting us shoot here today.
No problem. Anytime.
Now, first I have to ask, how did you get the name Canadian Bakin?
That started from the gym that I go to. When I first went there, they were convinced that I was Canadian because I just got back from a trip from Canada visiting some friends. I had a Canadian flag sticker on the back of my car. I don't have the Alabama accent as much as a lot of people here, so they were convinced, but I'm not. I grew up in Decatur. I've lived in Huntsville for a very long time now, and they just, since then, they nicknamed me Canadian, and for the past 12 years, they've just called me Canadian, so I answered to that, and then I started baking, and it just turned into a pun.
So the guys at the gym know they named your operation
Oh yeah,
here?
Several of them take credit for the name. No one knows who really did it.
Well, Matt, you opened during COVID, so challenging times and from the beginning, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's an easy way to remember when we opened because it was the exact same week in March that they shut down in indoor seating for restaurants. So as soon as we opened, we had to have a very quick pivot.
And John's preaching today about Jesus being the bread of life, the only thing that can truly sustain us. How did you come about Canadian Bakin and your focus on bread?
It started as just a hobby, just a cheap way to make some meals when I was living on my own, and I really enjoyed the process. It was relaxing. Just the fact that it took 3 days to make a loaf of bread was, in some ways, frustrating, but a lot of ways soothing. When it finally came out and it's something you were proud of, you could give it to friends.
And your bread takes 24 hours to bake.
Yeah, most of it does. We do overnight risers in the fridge. Our sourdough takes 3 days because we have to do the starter and then mix the bread and then it gets an overnight rise and then on the third day we bake it.
And no preservatives in your bread.
No, they will go stale very quickly, so we have to do a fresh batch every day.
Well, I'm sure the customers appreciate the fresh batch.
I hope so.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for letting us be here today.
No problem.
In 1925, just 97 years ago, the famed Scopes monkey trial took place in Dayton, Tennessee. It's often billed now as a showdown between science and religion, but it wasn't intended for that. It actually was more of a publicity stunt for all parties involved, and it sort of spiraled out of control. But what's most interesting about that trial is the textbook that was at the center of it all. The book taught what is known as eugenics. This is the belief that, like you would do with plants or in breeding animals, careful selection and mixing of some breeds and lack of consideration for others would lead to a more genetically pure breed. Here's a quote from the book. When people marry, there are certain things that the individual as well as the race should demand. The most important of these is freedom from germ diseases, which might be handed down to the offspring. Tuberculosis, syphilis, that dread disease which cripples and kills hundreds of thousands of innocent children, epilepsy, and feeble-mindedness are handicaps which it is not only unfair, but criminal to hand down to posterity. The science of being well-born is called eugenics. If such people were lower animals, we would probably kill them off to prevent them from spreading. Humanity will not allow this, but we do have the remedy of separating the sexes in asylums or other places and in various ways preventing intermarriage and the possibilities of perpetuating such a low and degenerate race. Remedies of this sort have been tried successfully in Europe and are now meeting with success in this country. This was written in 1914, taught in schools in 1925, and practiced in Nazi Germany in the 1940s. I share this with you not to beat up on science. I tell this to you to illustrate the power of zooming out, of finding the stories behind the story, the ones that help inform the story that you're looking at, whether it's the Scopes monkey trial or the woman in Tyre that had great faith. In that story, it's almost as if Jesus is wanting to say, it's not right to take the children's bread from the dogs, but it's good and it's generous, and I'm going to do it anyway. And I don't just have crumbs, I have leftovers. Are you ready for this, disciples? And the answer is no, they are not. But the good news is they retook the test, and it's why we're here today. The question for us is, do we pass the test? Whether you've been watching TV church for 30 weeks or 30 minutes, do you understand that people have used both the Bible and science to determine who is worthy and who isn't? But it is the gospel of Jesus, that allows us to see and value the inherent worth, the image of God found in all of humanity. It was people who read the Bible, who were shaped and formed by reading the Bible, and who saw what the Bible said as what it said about themselves. It was people who read the Bible with all their heart and let the Bible read all of their heart. It was those people who grasped an understanding of the image of God stamped on all of humanity, who were the ones that fought for abolition, hospitals, education, individual rights, equality, and true justice for all. It was people like Eleanor Roosevelt who, in the wake of World War II and Nazism's havoc, and informed by her faith in Christ, led the United Nations in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is the test that Jesus wants his disciples to pass. If we don't zoom out on this story with Jesus, we can make the same mistake as countless others before us. We can see this as a case where Jesus is arguing racial and gender superiority. But by zooming out, we can see that it is more than that. He is teaching another lesson, and it is a master class. It wasn't Jesus who needed a lesson, and it wasn't the woman receiving a test. It was the disciples, and it is us. The final exam is on the table before you. How do you think you will do?
God sent his son. They called him Jesus. He came to love, heal and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave isn't there to prove my Savior lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he owns the future, and life is worth living just because he lives. How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives. But greater still, the calm assurance this child can face uncertain days because he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth living just because he lives. Then one day I'll cross the river, I'll fight life's final war with pain.
And as day tomorrow, because He lives. All fear is gone, because I know He holds the future, and life is worth the
Tennessee Valley Church means church has left the building. So has membership. Here's what I mean. You might be feeling a need or maybe even a call from God to be part of our church family in a more tangible way. If you're not able to join us physically here at 600 Governors Drive, whether because of distance, mobility, schedule, or some other reason, you still can be a member of First Baptist Huntsville. Let me send you information on what that would mean, what you could expect from your church, and what your church would expect from you. Email me at travis@fbchsv.org. Let me know of your desire for membership, and I'll help you get started. Join hands with us as we attempt to join hands with God Himself in His mission to the world.